Ladies and gentlemen, if you have lived long enough in this world, you have likely discovered that the greatest battles are not fought with swords or waged on fields of dust and blood. They are fought in the silence of our hearts, in the corridors of our minds, and in the secret places where only God and the enemy see. There are those who believe the unseen world to be mere fancy, an invention of ancient minds seeking to explain their troubles. But you who have felt the weight of unseen hands pressing upon your soul know otherwise. You know that evil is not simply the sum of human mistakes but a force with intelligence, strategy, and intent. You know because you have felt its opposition. There are times when a person experiences exhaustion, but not the kind that comes from hard labor or sleepless nights. This is a weariness that lingers even after rest, a heaviness that no amount of sleep can cure. It is as though an unseen weight has settled upon the soul, pressing it down, making even the simplest joys feel distant. This is not merely fatigue of the body, but a burden upon the spirit, something beyond the natural, something unseen yet undeniably real. This heaviness is not random. It does not strike without cause. It often comes when one is drawing closer to the light, when faith is growing, when steps toward righteousness are being taken. It is then that resistance appears, as though something wishes to pull you backward, to wrap you in chains you thought were long broken. The air feels thick, your prayers seem hollow, and the presence of God, once so near, feels obscured. It is as if the heavens have grown silent, and though you call out, there is no echo, no sense of being heard. There may be moments when this heaviness comes upon you suddenly. One day you are moving forward, walking in clarity and purpose, and the next you awaken to a deep and inexplicable sorrow. You search your heart for a reason, for some unconfessed sin or unresolved conflict, but there is none. The sadness is not tied to circumstances. It does not fade with distractions. It clings, persistent and unmoving, like a fog that refuses to lift. This is often accompanied by a lack of desire for the things of God. The scriptures that once spoke to you now seem lifeless. Worship, which once stirred your soul, feels empty. Prayer becomes a battle, every word forced, every moment spent in it weighed down by an unseen resistance. Even when you do pray, there is a sense that your words are ineffective, that they fall back to earth before they reach heaven. This, of course, is a lie, but in the moment it feels true. Memories of past failures may begin to surface. Regrets long surrendered suddenly return, whispered into your mind like accusations from an unseen voice. You are not truly changed, it says. You are only pretending. If you were sincere, why do you feel this way? These thoughts do not come with reasoned arguments, but with an almost instinctive force, seeking to persuade not by logic but by sheer emotional weight. You may also notice an increase in self-doubt. The confidence you once had in your calling, your abilities, or even your salvation begins to waver. The good that you have done suddenly seems insignificant. The progress you have made appears as nothing. It is as though a shadow has been cast over your entire journey, distorting what is true, making victory appear as defeat. This kind of heaviness does not merely affect the spirit, it seeps into the mind and even the body. You may find yourself feeling constantly fatigued, unable to concentrate, lacking motivation for things that once excited you. There may be an inexplicable irritability, an uncharacteristic impatience with those around you. You pull away from others, not out of anger but because every interaction feels like an effort too great to make. Isolation begins to seem preferable, though deep down, you know it is the last thing you need. It is tempting to dismiss all of this as natural emotions, as simply the ebb and flow of human experience. And while there is a natural element to it, there is often more at work than meets the eye. The enemy's strategy is rarely one of open confrontation. It is subtle, working in whispers, in shadows, in unseen pressures designed not to break you in a moment but to wear you down over time. The goal is not always to make you fall, but simply to make you slow down, to hesitate, to question whether the path you are walking is truly worth it. This is why discernment is crucial. Not every struggle is purely psychological. Not every sorrow is merely emotional. Some battles are spiritual, fought in realms unseen, pressing upon us in ways we do not always recognize until we are in the thick of them. Those who dismiss the unseen battle find themselves at its mercy, unarmed and unprepared, wondering why they feel crushed beneath a weight they cannot name. There comes a time when what was once clear begins to feel clouded, when truth itself seems to shift beneath your feet. It is not that facts have changed, nor that you have encountered some new revelation, but rather that a quiet, insidious doubt begins to creep into your mind. The confidence you once had in what you knew, in what you believed, is slowly undermined, not by reasoned argument, but by subtle distortions that make certainty feel just out of reach. This confusion does not strike at random. It comes when you are on the verge of deeper understanding, when you are walking with greater purpose, when you have begun to grasp what truly matters. It does not often begin with a direct lie but with a small question, a whisper that suggests you may have misunderstood something fundamental. "Are you sure?" it asks. "Did you really hear correctly? Perhaps you were mistaken." The goal is not to provide an answer, but to unravel your sense of security, to make you second-guess yourself until nothing feels certain anymore. Where you once found comfort in the promises of God, you may now feel an unfamiliar hesitation. Verses that once reassured you now seem distant, their meaning strangely unclear. You may begin to question whether they were ever meant for you at all. Maybe that applies to others, the thought suggests, but not to someone like you. Doubt does not need to present a direct contradiction, it only needs to plant the idea that perhaps you are the exception, that perhaps you have misunderstood something essential. This distortion extends beyond Scripture and into the very nature of God. The kindness you once believed in may now seem uncertain. The love that once felt near may now feel cold and distant. You might begin to wonder whether you have somehow wandered too far, whether the grace that once covered you has been exhausted. This is not because God has changed, nor because you have done something to sever yourself from Him, but because something is working to shift your perception, to make you see things differently than they truly are. Doubt can also take the form of overcomplication. What was once simple and clear may now seem impossibly complex. The faith that once guided you with ease now feels like a tangled web of unanswered questions. This is not the same as genuine curiosity or the desire to grow in knowledge. It is a deliberate confusion, a twisting of truth that makes it seem just out of reach. You may find yourself analyzing things endlessly, yet arriving at no conclusion, as though clarity is always just beyond your grasp. This distortion does not only affect your view of God, it also turns inward. You may begin to question yourself in ways you never have before. Were your past experiences real, or were they simply emotions? Was that moment of clarity truly divine guidance, or was it merely wishful thinking? Have you truly been changed, or have you simply been pretending all along? These thoughts do not come with any real evidence, yet they weigh heavily, making you feel as though you are standing on unstable ground. Another sign of this attack is an increasing suspicion of others. Where once you trusted the wisdom and counsel of those who have walked the path before you, you may now begin to wonder if they too have been misled. You may find yourself withdrawing from those who once strengthened your faith, not because of any real reason, but because a vague distrust has settled into your mind. Perhaps they are mistaken. Perhaps they do not see what you see. Perhaps they are holding something back. This isolation is not accidental. It is a carefully placed barrier, meant to keep you from the very voices that could help you find clarity again. Truth is not something that can be destroyed, but it can be distorted. The enemy knows that a direct attack on truth itself is often too obvious, too easy to recognize and resist. Instead, he works in subtlety, not by removing truth, but by twisting it just enough to make it seem uncertain. If he can make you question what you once knew, if he can make you hesitant where you were once confident, then he has already succeeded in slowing you down. Temptation is not always a sudden and obvious force. More often it creeps in quietly, disguising itself as something small, something manageable, something that seems almost harmless at first. It rarely announces itself with great fanfare, nor does it appear as an immediate and blatant evil. Instead, it arrives subtly, as a whisper, a fleeting thought, a minor indulgence that seems inconsequential. But temptation, once entertained, never remains small. It grows, it strengthens, it tightens its grip until what once seemed trivial becomes a battle that feels impossible to win. There are times when temptation is unusually strong, when old struggles that seemed long defeated suddenly resurface with greater force. This is not mere coincidence. It is a calculated effort to weaken you, to make you fall, or at the very least, to make you feel as though you are bound to fall eventually. The sins you thought were behind you begin to call your name again. Desires you had conquered stir within you once more, as though they had merely been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to return. In these moments it is easy to believe that you have made no real progress, that all your efforts have been for nothing. You may feel as though you are simply acting out the same cycle over and over again, moving forward only to be dragged back to where you started. This is not an accident. It is a deliberate attack meant to discourage you, to make you doubt your own strength, to convince you that you are no different than you were before. The voice of temptation does not only call you towards sin, it also seeks to rob you of hope. The attack is not always external. Sometimes it takes the form of a shift within, a slow dulling of conviction. What once disturbed your conscience no longer seems quite so serious. The urgency you once felt to resist has weakened. You may catch yourself making small compromises, allowing things that you once would have rejected without hesitation. This is one of the enemy's most effective strategies, not to destroy you outright, but to lull you into complacency, to make sin seem less and less dangerous until it becomes normal. The struggle intensifies when temptation is coupled with isolation. In times of spiritual attack, there is often a growing desire to withdraw from those who might hold you accountable, from the voices that might remind you of truth. You may feel an unexplainable reluctance to reach out for help, an urge to keep your struggles hidden. Shame begins to work alongside temptation, convincing you that you must fight alone, that admitting weakness would only lead to judgment. But isolation is the breeding ground of failure. When you stand alone, you become an easy target. Another sign of this battle is an increased desire for distractions. You may find yourself seeking comfort in things that do not satisfy, filling your time with empty pursuits simply to avoid facing what is happening within you. The things of God may begin to seem distant, even unappealing, while worldly pleasures become more enticing. This is not a natural shift. It is a carefully orchestrated strategy designed to pull your attention away, to dull your spiritual senses, to make you feel as though drifting away is not a conscious choice, but something that is simply happening to you. Guilt and accusation often follow closely behind. The moment temptation is entertained, another voice appears, one that does not entice but condemns. It tells you that you have already failed, that there is no point in resisting now. It suggests that since you have fallen once, you will inevitably fall again, so why fight it? The very force that lured you into sin now turns against you, whispering that you are too far gone, that you are not strong enough to stand, that even if you try, you will fail again. Temptation is not just about leading you into sin, it is about keeping you there. It does not only seek to make you stumble, but to convince you that standing up again is pointless. The battle is not only against sin itself, but against the lies that come with it, the distortions that seek to keep you bound long after the act itself is done. There is a certain weariness that does not come from physical exhaustion, but from something deeper, something that weighs upon the soul. It is a heaviness that slowly builds, an unseen force that pushes you toward isolation. The desire to be alone grows, but not in the way that solitude sometimes refreshes the spirit. This is a pulling away, a retreat from others that does not bring peace but instead deepens the sense of disconnection. It begins subtly, perhaps a missed conversation, an unanswered message, an excuse to avoid a gathering. But over time the distance grows, and before you realize it, you have drifted far from those who once strengthened you. This is not always by conscious choice. Sometimes it is the result of an unshakable feeling that no one truly understands what you are going through. You may look at those around you and feel that their lives are simpler, their struggles less intense. You may feel as though speaking up would be pointless, that no one would truly grasp the weight you carry. The thought takes root that you are better off handling things alone, that reaching out would only be a burden to others. Yet this is one of the greatest deceptions of all, that isolation is safer than community, that silence is preferable to vulnerability. There may also be an inexplicable tension in relationships that once brought joy and encouragement. Where there was once understanding, there is now friction. Misunderstandings arise more easily. Conversations that should bring comfort feel strained. You may sense an unusual irritability toward others, even toward those you know care for you deeply. Small offenses seem magnified, and patience runs thin. The bonds that once held you together with others begin to feel weak, as though unseen hands are working to fray the threads of connection. Alongside this isolation comes a growing disinterest in spiritual fellowship. The thought of gathering with others in worship or discussion may suddenly seem unappealing, even burdensome. Where once there was eagerness, there is now reluctance. Excuses come easily: fatigue, busyness, the need for space. Yet beneath the surface, something else is at work, something that seeks to separate you from the very people who could help lift you out of the struggle. The enemy knows that an isolated believer is far more vulnerable than one surrounded by others. Doubt can also seep into your perception of those who have walked beside you in faith. You may begin to question their sincerity, their wisdom, even their motives. Perhaps they are not as strong as they seem. Perhaps their advice is flawed. Perhaps they do not truly care. The more these thoughts take hold, the easier it becomes to pull away, to justify the distance. This too is no accident. It is a carefully placed strategy designed to weaken you by cutting you off from the very sources of strength you once relied upon. This division is not only internal but external. Conflicts that seem to arise out of nowhere, words spoken in haste, old wounds suddenly reopened, these are not always mere coincidences. There are forces that seek to divide, to create rifts where there were once strong bonds. What should be resolved with understanding instead festers into resentment. What should be a moment of grace becomes another reason to withdraw. Division does not always come with a great falling out. Sometimes it comes in the form of a slow and steady cooling of relationships, a gradual erosion of unity. Even prayer, which should be a place of restoration, may begin to feel empty. The desire to intercede for others weakens. The ability to see beyond your own struggles diminishes. Where you once carried the burdens of others in love, you now find it difficult to care, or worse, you resent the effort it takes. This is one of the more subtle but dangerous effects of spiritual attack. Not only does it separate you from people, but it also hardens your heart toward them. The love that once flowed freely now feels strained, and without realizing it, you have begun to withdraw even from the God who once softened your heart. Fear and anxiety are not always loud forces that crash into life with sudden intensity. More often they creep in slowly, settling into the mind like an unwelcome guest that refuses to leave. What begins as a passing concern grows into a persistent unease, a nagging sense that something is wrong, even when there is no clear reason for it. The heart beats faster, the mind races through possibilities, and though nothing visible has changed, everything feels uncertain. This is not a natural fear that warns of genuine danger. It is a shadowy, oppressive fear that lingers without cause, whispering threats that never fully take shape. This fear does not always present itself as terror. Sometimes it is simply a quiet but constant sense of dread, an underlying feeling that something unseen is watching, waiting. It is an unease that has no clear source, yet it grips tightly. The world feels heavier, the nights longer, the silence more unsettling. Even in moments of peace, there is a part of the mind that remains on edge, bracing for something unknown. Anxiety often follows closely behind, turning small worries into overwhelming burdens. Thoughts loop endlessly, replaying the same fears in different forms. What if something goes wrong? What if I fail? What if I am not enough? These questions do not come with answers, only more uncertainty. Sleep becomes restless, the body tense, as though preparing for a battle that never arrives. Even when the mind knows there is no reason for such fear, the heart does not listen. This fear takes the form of paranoia, the growing suspicion that they are being watched, monitored, or targeted in ways that they cannot prove but cannot shake. Shadows seem darker, noises seem louder, and the feeling of being alone is never truly comforting, because it does not feel like true solitude. There is a sense that something unseen lingers at the edges of awareness, never fully revealing itself, but never entirely gone. The logical mind may dismiss it, but the feeling remains persistent and unrelenting. This fear does not only affect the mind, it begins to shape decisions, to alter behavior. Opportunities that once seemed exciting now feel too risky. Steps of faith that once felt natural now seem impossible. Where once there was confidence, there is now hesitation. The voice of fear does not need to shout, it only needs to whisper often enough that its presence becomes familiar, that its influence begins to feel like wisdom rather than bondage. Anxiety also warps the way one sees the future. Instead of anticipation, there is apprehension. Instead of hope, there is doubt. Every possible outcome seems to lean toward failure, disappointment, or loss. Even when there is no reason to expect disaster, the mind is convinced that it is only a matter of time. Plans are abandoned before they are made. Dreams are dismissed before they have a chance to grow. Fear convinces its victims that playing it safe is the only option, that risk is too great, that stepping out will surely end in regret. Spiritual attack often intensifies these fears, making them feel more real, more pressing. There is a reason fear is such a powerful weapon. It isolates, it weakens, it paralyzes. It makes people believe that they are alone in their struggle, that no one else could possibly understand. It convinces them that reaching out for help is pointless, that their fears are too foolish to be spoken aloud. And so fear feeds itself, growing stronger in silence, taking deeper root in a heart that was never meant to carry it. Even faith itself can begin to feel fragile under the weight of such fear. Prayers feel ineffective, as though the words are merely spoken into emptiness. Worship feels hollow, as though the heart cannot connect with what once felt so real. The promises that once brought peace now feel distant, their certainty eroded by the constant presence of anxiety. Fear creates distance, not only between people but between the soul and the truth it once held onto without question. There are moments when life itself seems to lose its vibrancy, when what once brought joy now feels dull and distant. A heaviness settles in, not the natural tiredness that follows effort, but something deeper, something that lingers even in rest. It is as if a fog has descended over the soul, muting colors, silencing songs, making even the simplest pleasures feel hollow. This numbness does not always announce itself with sorrow or grief. More often it is an absence, a quiet withdrawal from the richness of life. Laughter feels forced. Conversations feel shallow. The words of Scripture, which once carried weight and warmth, now seem strangely empty. The soul is not in anguish, but neither is it at peace. It simply drifts, unanchored, disconnected from the depth it once knew. In these moments, prayer feels more like an obligation than a source of strength. The desire to seek God is met with resistance, not because of doubt, but because the heart no longer feels engaged. Prayers that once flowed easily now feel dry, repetitive, as though they are spoken into nothingness. The mind knows the truth, yet the heart feels distant from it, unable to grasp it as it once did. It is not rebellion, nor even despair, it is simply exhaustion of the soul. This weariness does not come from physical strain alone. There is a kind of fatigue that sleep cannot cure, a depletion that no amount of rest can restore. It is not the body that is tired, but the spirit. Even in quiet moments, even when all external demands have ceased, the exhaustion remains. It is not merely a lack of energy, but a lack of motivation, a slow unraveling of the will to press forward. Isolation often follows closely behind, not the intentional solitude that refreshes, but a drifting away from the people and places that once brought encouragement. The thought of engaging with others feels overwhelming. The effort required to explain what is happening seems too great. Even the idea of seeking comfort feels burdensome, as though the energy it would take to reach out is more than what is available. It becomes easier to withdraw, to let the world move on without participation, to let silence settle in. With this withdrawal comes an increasing sense of detachment. Things that once mattered deeply no longer seem urgent. The passion that once drove action now feels distant, like a memory of someone else's life. The voice that once stirred conviction is quieter now, not silenced completely, but muffled beneath layers of weariness. Decisions are made not out of desire, but out of necessity. Faith is held not with eagerness, but with a quiet and tired grip. Even the struggle against this state begins to feel like too much. The very idea of fighting through the numbness seems exhausting, and so it remains. Days pass without change. The heart remains quiet, waiting for something to stir it again, unsure if or when that will come. In times like these, the temptation is not toward obvious rebellion, but toward resignation. Not a loud rejection of truth, but a quiet drifting away from it. It is easier to settle into routine, to go through the motions, to let faith become habit, rather than relationship. The danger is not in a single great fall, but in the slow and subtle fading of passion, in the gradual surrender to apathy. There is something unseen at work in these moments, something that seeks not to destroy in one swift blow, but to erode slowly over time. The enemy does not always come with great force. Sometimes he comes with quiet exhaustion, with the slow dulling of the spirit, with the steady numbing of what was once vibrant and alive.